that was my good fortune, that I could study in places where we learned what good schools were. So that's good luck. My other good fortune was that I studied in some horrible schools. So I came to know what should not be done. And this is because my father was in the army. So we traveled the country. So until I reached senior school, I was shuttling around with my parents. So we actually attended schools which were rather awful in every aspect. So that is an education in itself, because you said this is what should not happen in a school. So I think I had this experience of the extremes, which was good learning. Then my teaching experience was also extreme. I started in a school where, it was co-educational, it was a day school, and we had about 60 or 70 children stuffed into a classroom. So trying to teach there was a nightmare, and you just couldn't achieve any kind of teaching learning goals. But then I also got a chance to teach at Welham, which was fantastic because we taught the most intelligent kids in small numbers. And so that was really wonderful. So, and then the other side of it was that running a school like Welham was another experience. But after that, I got involved, and I'm still very involved with schools which are for children from an underprivileged background with a lot of other problems. And we are trying to run a good school for such children. Now that has a lot of challenges in itself. So I had told Nahia, I said, I will probably speak on why children from the disadvantaged segment don't do well in school. And in the K-12 education is what she had written. And that interested me because the K-12 education model is such a hodgepodge that nobody really knows what it is. Teachers don't, children, parents, nobody really knows. People in government don't know, and the variety is much too much. So I just had a little query, which I put to you, Amir, and to Nahia, that if people who are listening in today would rather ask questions first, I could scrap my old presentation and just get into discussing what makes a good school through a kind of question and answer format. That would be, I'm equally open to that. Can't hear you.
So we can't hear you, sir. No, we can't hear you.
I wonder what's going on. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was saying, Jyotsna, that if we could do both. So
All right.
We go with you through the presentation.
So that's a different one. Okay. Okay. Yeah. But we can, I would like to suggest, I'm available any Thursday, Amir, for you. So discussions can continue.
Acha, life has changed, Jyotsna. Earlier it was you were available any day.
No, you are the people who said restricted it to Thursday.
No, for me. I was only talking
Whenever. What I mean is for anybody, anytime. I'm a retired person. But because the questions are too many around this, and we can just always be available for a discussion. I'll also learn. So essentially, I'll just go to this. Can you all see? Can you see it, Naya?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I really like this picture. I would call it a very good school. It's what they've done is used whatever they have in the best possible way. This is, you can see the children are all far apart. School walls have been turned into blackboards. I thought it was really wise, and it allowed them to continue studying. It's given them space, and it is so cleverly done with the teacher standing at the corner being able to see both sides. So really speaking, a good school needn't be a fancy school. Good school is which attains its goals and knows what those goals are. So I'm going to run through this really fast. We have a terrible problem. I call this just the causes for an ailing education system, or why education ails in India. So we've got a population which has children below 14 years of age. There are about 30. This data I got from Oxfam. So this is really a huge challenge. Then, of course, we have societal mindsets, we have social systems. There are a lot of economic compulsions, political prioritization, the governance and bureaucracy issues. There are a lot of developmental imbalances and divides. I'll just touch on them briefly as I go forward. And then the very educational system itself, the K-12 education system, which I think is what we need to speak of. And after a little gap, I'm putting this because I think right now, this is a massive, massive factor, and it's going to stay for some years. And in our country, where vaccination is starting from the oldest, I have a feeling the children are going to suffer for a long, long time when it comes to schooling. So the topic being, why do disadvantaged children not do well? So who are the children who actually are at a disadvantage? Of course, low income and poverty is the biggest one because it leads to 20 other things. Parental educational levels, which are very low, illiteracy in parents, this leads to the poverty cycles. And it becomes a very, very difficult hurdle to sort of surmount. And we actually have the largest population of illiterate adults. And it's not just for their own sake, but for their children's sake. They are very unable to participate in their children's education at all. And we'll see later why we can't have the parents not part of the children's education. Then geographical locations, children in some geographies are very disadvantaged. And then children in certain group systems, caste, tribe, class, gender, religious groups, they are disadvantaged when it comes to education. And children who don't have access to schools and teachers and educational support, they are at a disadvantage. They just don't have the school. And disability, actual disability, physical and mental, and non-inclusion in education, of course, these children are doubly disadvantaged. So, I mean, all these factors would turn a child into a disadvantaged child severely. Let's just look at low income effects, because all the family decisions get based on economics. Child labor, migration is a big problem because they keep moving. It's a nomadic existence, and they keep migrating for economic reasons. And of course, schooling is the first thing that suffers, even if it were available. And then there are a lot of gender-based work duties at home and so on. And we know that a lot of the people listening in today are involved in research, and this data is all available. And then low income leads to poor health, poor nutrition, which of course makes it very tough for children. And then there are no amenities at home, no electricity, you're living in jhuggies, there are children, I mean, weather conditions are terrible, there's dirt, there's ill health because of that. And then, you know, there are no amenities. So that's really a problem. And I've highlighted this in a separate color because I think my whole thrust is that all the children who are from any of these disadvantaged segments, their access is only to the government schools or to schools run by NGOs, where they won't need to pay. Otherwise, the average private school, which is on a side street with with rotten teaching and no facilities, even they are charging between 2,000 to 2,500 rupees a month, which makes it very, very terrible for people who have, even 2 children or 3 children. So I did in Dehradun, for example, we really looked at what these hole-in-the-wall private schools were charging. And we looked at all the poorer working class segment, and they preferred to send their children to these schools rather than even to a government school. And they said teacher nahi hota kind of business for government schools, but they really didn't know how to pay for these schools. So they'd send one child and not the other. And then, of course, the elder son would get sent and then somebody else. It is a very severe problem, the access only being to government and NGO schools. Then, of course, the children are deprived of any kind of school equipment, clothing, books, stationery, even woolens in winter, all sorts of stuff. And the digital divide is not a divide, it's a Grand Canyon. I mean, there can be no access to the digital side of education for all these children. And in today's scenario, it's a double, triple disadvantage. I mean, it's a complete, there is no learning happening except what they get at home. Geography is also, strangely, really extreme geographies, people work their way around them with greater and better intent. Take a place like Ladakh, schooling is fantastic. I've lived there, I've seen it, so I can speak firsthand that all sorts of weather, it's a social attitude of being able to send your children to school. So in Ladakh, in fact, which is so extreme, and now of course we have, much more happening in Ladakh, educationally, great initiatives. So it's not merely the geography, but geography becomes a big excuse for government not being able to set up schools, not being able to maintain them. It's a very different community effort which allows schools to come up in tough terrain. Urban versus rural, we all know that. There's a massive difference. If you're a child living in an urban area or rural area, it's a big difference if you're living in a remote place or where there's easy access. I live in Uttarakhand, and like I told you, right now I'm very, very closely working with and associated with a school for girls. We take in children from very economically weak sections from different districts of Uttarakhand, and so 2 or 3 from each district, and we running a very good high value residential school for them in Dehradun. That means they all have to come to Dehradun to study. They come from economically weak homes, which are checked out by the teachers. So it's a lot of personal involvement. But we can see when we take the children in, we sit with them and we talk to them, and I wouldn't call it an interview. Most of the little girls, because they come in class 5, they sometimes walk for 2 hours uphill and so on, just to get to school. So accessibility is really difficult in some geographies. There are no roads, there are no transportation systems, weather is extreme, and topography, and then the seasons also trouble you. So the effects of geography are, of course, there in setting up the schools, maintaining the schools. There's a terrible teacher scarcity, there's teacher fatigue. And most of the primary school teachers in many parts of India are women who also have a lot of other work. There's student fatigue, particularly if they are not very healthy or not very nourished. There's a lot of problem of student security and safety as well. There are rivers in their way, there's, snowfall, all sorts of stuff. Then the seasons in these geographies affect the school days and the school calendar. I spent 8 years in Rajasthan, Western Rajasthan. It was equally tough there. And then what I saw in Ladakh was equally tough. But this can only be overcome by some tremendous intent and correct goal setting and integrity of purpose. Then, of course, we know the societal factors. I won't go into them too much, but we know the male and female literacy rates. And we are not talking of education here. We are only speaking of literacy, which is a very, very low marker. It's just literacy means you should be able to write. Only reading does not account as literacy, but you have to be able to write as well. And this is very low, even for those who are so-called literate. They really don't write too well. And this is the difference. In scheduled tribes, these are the latest figures. Literacy is about 59%. And in scheduled castes, it's at about 66%. These are more recent figures. But the other thing is societally, which we feel a great deal in all segments of students and parents, is very poor or absent parenting and role modeling. And you have a lot of absentee fathers, and mothers are busy. In the poorer sections, mothers are also working. There is no parenting. Children have to fend for themselves, and many role models should not be used as role models. There are co-education barriers. So after a certain class, parents are not willing to send their children, especially daughters, to co-ed institutions. And we know the gender attitudes. I'll give you an example. During lockdown, there was a study which was conducted by the Center for Budget and Policy Studies. And they found that the maximum effect was on girls, because if there was one mobile phone or smartphone at home, the girls didn't get to use it, so they couldn't attend online. They were the ones who had to handle household chores, so their studies got disrupted. So there's a lot of data already collected on this, and we know the gender impact. And this is going to continue for the next few years. They also did a study on how many girls were forced to leave school, saying that there is no schooling going on, so there's no need for us to pay the fees. Parents still made an effort to keep their boys there, but many girls were actually married off. So the Center for the Budget and Policy Studies collected data on how COVID has impacted girls in schools. Local mafias don't allow NGOs to function. There is, for example, in our own city, there's a most marvelous NGO. They keep on trying to say that if children can't be brought to school, let's take the schooling to the children. So they look for locations, small places where teachers are willing to go set up a makeshift school and just teach the kids running around at timings which those children will benefit from. And the local land mafias keep chasing them off. They say, why are you under this bridge? Why are you on the side of this? Are you trying to grab the land? It's something so terrible that NGOs are having to fight and not getting governmental support on. And now the funding requirements for NGOs have been made stricter and stricter by the government policies. So it's, the grain and the chaff is getting thrown out together. So sincere efforts as well as shady efforts are all being swept off in one go. The NEP came out in 2020, but the government prioritization for education is extremely strange. First of all, it's a tussle. It's on the concurrent list, and I think that's a big problem. Education, therefore, is fallen between two stools. It's neither center nor state, instead of saying center and state. It's neither public nor private. The government seems to have recognized the private school model by saying that percentage of children will have to be taken in by private schools, which is fine. 25% of them in class 1 and going forward by the Right to Education Act. However, the government is not paying the private schools. They are not reimbursing them. Most of the state governments say the center should, the center says the state should. So there is a constant kind of tussle on what should get priority and who controls it. Should there be controls? The RTE itself started off as a document, the bill, the act which came in 2009. It's done a flip-flop policy. Now, for example, it said all children will be promoted up to class 8. You can't hold back a child. This is because there's data which is telling you about wastage and stagnation in the primary and secondary classes in schools. But the thing is that just to improve the data, they said you can't hold them back, so there'll be no data for stagnation. And everybody will get promoted. But the fact is that when they carried out the PISA testing, those children were absolutely unfit for the next class. Now in the NEP, they are saying that foundational literacy is extremely important, and they actually amended the RTE to say you can hold back children in class 5, in class 8, and so on. Now, all this trickling down to schools, whether government schools or private schools, it confuses everybody. And in the bargain, schools, teachers, they just say, oh, let's just tick the boxes. Let's just do khana purti. And there's no real education and learning happening there. So in a way, this confused kind of messaging which comes out from the government, it's very misleading. For example, we now have a Ministry of Education. The education minister rolled out the new education policy 2020, and it's a marvelous sounding document. But in the same year, in the central budget, they reduced the budget for education. And they reduced the budget, they cut it down by 6% over last year. So between 2020 and 21, they reduced the allocations for education, and they further reduced the allocations for school education. In a year when COVID had hit all the schools, instead of supporting them and saying we'll pay the teachers, so we'll allocate more towards the schools, they actually reduced it. They also said, the government also said that schools have to pay teachers, and the government also said that schools cannot charge fees. So what has actually happened is that schools are actually, there are schools which considered shutting down. Now this has happened, and you know, it's been very heartbreaking, because a lot of sincere people who felt, let's go ahead. Now they say there's no end to the COVID. And if this is going to happen, children are not coming, parents are not paying, we have to pay the teachers, there's no support from the government. So this kind of messaging is coming through. The government said in its budget, finance minister said, we are going to open 100 Sainik schools. Now, you know, Sainik schools are military schools. When you're cutting down educational budget, you're slashing it, then you're saying we're going to open Sainik schools, but we are not going to do anything more for primary schools. The NEP is saying a lot about foundational literacy and empowering the Anganwadi workers, but they're not giving them any more money. So this is mixed messaging. For example, this I found so ridiculous, it was almost laughable, that the budget in 2021 budget for this national scheme for girls to incentivize them to go do higher secondary level studies, the national budget is 1 crore. I mean, it would have been better not to have scrapped the scheme. So this is what I'm saying, that when the NEP, in the same month, the education minister said, we need to double the expenditure every year over the next 10 years. And the finance minister said that we are going to strengthen 15,000 schools. This was 1% of all the schools in the country. So this is what is the kind of messaging about prioritization of education. There are announcements, but there's no ground support. And of course, we know the bureaucratic barriers. The government, in government schools, which are the schools where disadvantaged children can go and study, there are recruitment problems, there are vacancies, the schools are not staffed. There are NGOs like the Kaivalya Foundation and NGOs like Central Square. They found most of the government school teachers were involved in litigation with the government because they had not received salaries or reimbursement for medical costs. So they were refusing to go to work. And refusing to go to remote areas, we know that. So this was a big hassle. I mean, a teacher who is in court is really not going to be interested in teaching. We know what's happening with midday meals, what is the quality of it. There are children coming just for the meal. Teachers are having to cook it. So really the learning goals are something else here. And teachers are put on a lot of other duties. Although they have said in RTE, they are not to be put on these duties, but they are regularly put on all that. And then the government has a problem monitoring all these schemes as well, which keep coming up. And there is a lot of interference and an attempt to, to be very tight on permissions and no objection certificates. I'm not going to even bother to talk about the corruption side of it. I'm just saying that on the one side, you want to be regulatory to private schools, but your own schools are reeling under a lot of bureaucratic difficulty. Now, this is just the, I would say, the structure of the system. But within that structure, this slide, according to me, is where the teacher comes into it. And this is what has to happen inside the school or inside the classroom. So here, the first thing is that the pre-primary and primary education, there's an immense learning gap. And here, going by what is happening in schools, government schools, as well as the smaller, round the corner kind of private school, this is awfully addressed. The teachers who are employed, their training levels, their understanding of what is required at the pre-primary and primary education level is really weak. I tried running some teacher training for teachers at this level for teaching of language, for example. And that is a foundational learning requirement till you, because the first thing is learning to read. Only then can you read to learn. So learning to read, trying to teach children how to read, there was a huge gap. Now, if a child doesn't learn how to read properly, there's no point in going further. You're not going to be able to manage. You'll just be reeling under the load that you have to take on. Children, there's a lot of absenteeism. They don't attend school regularly. Teachers don't attend school regularly. And then they really don't know what are the learning goals for primary education. And I think The good school, which Amir was talking of, I think it needs to start here. It doesn't matter if you're sitting under a tree, but that teacher really needs to know what is foundational education, foundational learning, and what are the best ways of getting it across to the children so that it stays with them. And this is a big gap. And then children are just pushed up and they just mug some stuff and they get pushed up. So the teachers themselves are unaware of what these markers are, which show you readiness for the next level. And I think this is a big teacher training gap. I've talked to teachers in well-known schools and smaller schools, day schools, boarding schools, teachers at the primary level. Actually, I'll give you an example. If you have a textbook, let's say for class 1, they think that you have to test them on the information in the book, whereas it's a book for teaching language. And the whole approach of teaching is absolutely wrong. And this is what causes this gap. Then, of course, the whole country is under one syllabus. Let's say Uttarakhand, or the state that I am now living in and have worked in for so long, it came into existence in the year 2000. And they said that as a state, before that we were part of Uttar Pradesh, and children were attempting the UP board. So they said, what board should we go for? And they said CBSE. Now that's a central board. More and more schools, more and more states are following the CBSE model. So the syllabus construction, which is considered okay for a child who may be studying in Bombay or Delhi, the same thing has to be learned by a child in a remote place. And he may have no idea of all that. And child comes later. The teachers have no idea of so much of what they have to teach. There was one textbook for social studies for class 3 or something. It was actually teaching about mountain ranges in Eastern Africa. And I just kept thinking, it's my servant's daughter trying to understand Drakensberg Mountains or whatever. And it was of so little relevance. And it was like, it's like putting a person into something strange. It's like in an alien landscape. But when this one size fits all approach is taken, there's a problem. Language is a terrible problem. It's a bad problem in villages. It's a bad problem in towns because it's mixed with confused aspirations of English along with it. And so what happens is, because the children don't have the language or the medium of instruction, they don't know English, parents don't know English, and therefore they learn everything by heart without understanding. And it's agony. That's not real learning happening out there. And I think this language difficulty it's a tough one for teachers. Even for a teacher like me teaching in one of the best schools of the country, I used to occasionally say, I'm explaining language all the time when I'm actually supposed to go ahead with my geography lesson. Because that's a barrier. It's a barrier for teachers and students and for parents. Nobody can understand the textbooks, and there's a dependency on textbooks. Now, the teachers who are having to teach in our country, and let's say the 4 to 14-year age group population, last count, the growth rate of children in our country was so much that there were 40 kids born per minute, 40 babies per minute. According to me, that's one classroom and 2 teachers per minute that you require. I don't know how that gap is filled and with what quality that gap is filled, but the children are there. And we are aiming for universal education because it is it's your constitutional right. And universal education means that if you are educating 35 crores of small children, you need twice as many teachers. I don't think we have them. And they need to be really good teachers. So the teacher's knowledge is inadequate. You have chemistry teachers who are teaching biology. You've got Hindi teachers teaching history. And this is happening across the country. So there's a gap in teachers' knowledge, methodology for teaching that subject. And there's no concern for the child. There's a lot of heartlessness with which children get taught. So school becomes a bad experience. Assessment and evaluation is terrible. I'm not going into details. We can do it at question time. But this marks obsessed business, no one is assessing whether real learning has happened. Only how performance at a particular time has happened. And then putting a value to it. And it confuses parents and children. And then there are, even when you got children doing badly, you say if you get 33%, you can pass, but 33% in class 7 or class 8, does it mean you're ready to go to class 9 and tackle the learning that you're required to do when you hardly know 33% of the previous class load or understanding of concepts? So there's no provision for remedial teaching or bridge programs to help kids who've got learning gaps. And the sheer numbers are so overwhelming. And then, of course, the schools have no connect with parents, and parental ignorance is, they don't know how to handle the books and texts and syllabus and all this kind of stuff. But without support, children get lost. And there are too many lost kids. And then there are no professional development programs. The Kaivalya Foundation thought that they would attack this one aspect and try and make good schools. They said if we can create very good principals, heads of schools, a lot of problems will get sorted out. And after putting in a lot of time and money, they realized it wouldn't happen. Even with the best training for heads of school, unless a lot of the support infrastructure was moving along, there was a very slight difference that it made. It made a little difference, but it just wasn't enough. It was less than 20% difference with so much of effort. So they realized you have to speak to local governance, you have to improve economic situations, societal things, convince parents, and try and address many related issues before any difference happened. And then, of course, school schedules are difficult for children. School timings, vacations, and when it troubles parents, they don't send kids to school. I'm coming to the end of it. Technology, it's a boon and a bane. Those who have it or don't have it, it's a curse either way. And the digital divide is so terrible. This little picture I've got is of kids in Northeast India who climbed up trying to get net connectivity. So they actually climbed up hoping that they would get the internet on their phones because the teacher was teaching through WhatsApp. There's no training for the teachers. They don't know what to send on WhatsApp. I got a question from a teacher when I was doing training. She said, ma'am, what should I ask my children to do online for my Hindi language class? So, what to do for a Hindi language class when it is asynchronous teaching through WhatsApp. I mean, it's really a challenge. And it requires so much of thought and training, which is just not there. And then, of course, there's a lot of lack of infrastructure support. The school that I'm working with, 2 schools, in fact, 3 schools. There's one for disabled children, one for the children from economically weak sections. They said, we don't get electricity where we are. It comes for a short time. We have one mobile phone. My brother takes it more often. My father needs it at times. The when we do get some connectivity, it's really, really poor quality signal. I can't hear my teacher. I can't upload my lessons. So, it's all in all very difficult. And if there are 3 children who need to be attending class at the same time, even a rich parent can't buy 3 separate tabs or laptops or smartphones. It's a big problem. And then, of course, things get hung, things get broken, there's no tech support, software doesn't work. In remote areas, there's nothing. Even in towns, there's nothing. And so it's just been a very, very difficult time for everyone. The COVID years. We don't know how long they're going to go. So my bottom line questions are, where do we start with all this? How do we fix it? Who needs to start? Is it you? Is it me? What should the road be? Like some foundations have tried, the Wipro group, the Azim Premji Foundation, they've set up the university, they're training teachers. What should be the road to make schooling good? And what should be the direction in which we need to go? The picture I put here is Ranjit Singh Disale, who got the award, which is almost like the Nobel for teachers. And he decided to share, he's from Maharashtra, and he decided to share his award money with 9 other finalists across the world. But look, what he was able to do was because he wanted to be an engineer, and he studied engineering. So he started using that sort of thought into his teaching. And we've seen how people who wanted to do engineering just made a difference as different kind of teachers. So maybe there are people who got to answer some of these questions. I'll leave it here. These are the challenges. Some are beyond our control. Some we may be able to control. I think that's about all for today, that I can talk about the problems that I witnessed.